I'm taking a closer look inside the cabinet now to see just how this chassis is going to fit back in here. When I got this radio, the chassis was just held in by 2 bolts up top here, which is not sufficient at all for all that weight. Dial goes through here, and 3 controls. Since then I found out that there's supposed to be a board that would run along the backside, and that's really supported the weight of this thing. There should also have been 2 big rubber washers and then steel washers in the backside, or else I think mine was just bolted straight to the top. So I think I got some rubber washers on hand, it'll be just fine, and I can reattach it up there without any troubles. But what about this board? Well, luckily I got some photos and a tracing from another collector who restored one of these, and here it is. So this is the bottom view of this board. So it's a square notched at the corners to fit inside the rounded front of the cabinet. And it should be 3/4 inch ply, so picked up a nice piece of 3/4 inch birch plywood, and I finally got myself a circular saw. Not the model I wanted, but after going to 2 Home Depots, I settled for this. I'm sure it'll work fine. Now, it's kind of a bummer that this is just large enough that I can only cut out one from this board. So no matter how you orient this, if it was like 1/4 or 1/2 inch skinnier, I could rip this right down the middle, and then if I screw up I can do a second one. But nope, it's just too big, so I got one chance to get this right. The first thing I want to do is take this template and trim it down to the outline, and then see how this fits in my cabinet before I bother with this. Now, what I'm really confused about is I can clearly see you got 3 holes up there, 3 holes there. That's where it screws in. But what about the other side? From his reference photos, there's clearly something across here that it's screwed into. It can't screw in up here. This is quite a bit higher than that. So unless it's mounted at an angle, which I'm sure it doesn't. So if you come straight across, you end up going right under the board. Now you can see where there were screw holes here. So what I think was up here is a board, something that stuck down that was wide enough. Now I cut out a board that I was going to put in here like this. I think I need something that's like this wide. And it goes half underneath here, screws in, and then it'll be down a bit, and then it'll be level. But even that, boy, well, I can't be flush with this. I'm pretty sure, because it's still, well, it's, Alright, so that seems to be pretty flat. Okay. I gotta look at his photo again, but it seems like, okay, if I do take a piece, this is 3/4 inch thick basically, so maybe it goes on top here and then under here. But on his photos, well, let's take a look at the reference photo that we got. Okay, so this is the best photo I've got of that board in the cabinet. So here's the notched out corners, 3 screws, no problem. But look at the other side. It sure looks to me like it's screwed from the top side. So what on mine, there's nothing here, it'd just be floating in space. But I can see an edge of something here. So I thought maybe this board, on mine it looks like this board would slide underneath this board, and these 4 screws here would drive into this. And these 3 screws wouldn't exist. On this one, yeah, I'm not sure because I don't see anything down here really. I don't know what that little bit is sticking out up there. Let's see if the other photos I've got show anything more. Well, here it is with that board out. The chassis still in. So this, whatever this is, does not exist in my cabinet. Huh. Wish there was a view from this angle. Well, that's all I've got to work with. It's been a few years since I contacted him. Maybe I could get some more input. I don't know. And now back to mine. So, here are the 4 holes that were clearly visible in the other photo. On mine, there's nothing on the other side. Those are just going to nowhere. Kinda looks like there might have been something along here on the sides. Maybe there was something glued in here. You can see it's lighter up here than down here. And it's lighter along this back side too. And then here I had to put a patch in too because there's another hole blown out. That's how lighter. Or, no, it's actually split here. Huh. And, there's a nice split in the wood right there. Assuming it fits, geez, I'm kind of inclined to take this, which would, let's see, runs to about up front here, extends. I'm not going to trim this out to fit, but boy, just eyeballing it, looks like it would come to just about here. If I extend that a bit further back, I think it'd be easier if everything lines up right to just slide it in under here and drive screws from this side down. Plus, the weight of the radio is going to be going this way anyway, so it seems to be more stable to have the weight resting against this. Plus, this thing's not all that heavy anyways. Well, now that it's cut to fit, I can see that it will just fall right through. So if I bring it up the front, line it up with these, you can see it's not touching anything back here, it just flop. So if I really want to do it the way it looked like it was in the photo, what I'd have to do is get an L piece of wood. A piece of wood that would extend down and then jut out. Well, if I knew if this would be exactly level and work out. I have a feeling it's not. I think that if I go like this, I'm at a bit of an angle and it would actually need to drop down a little bit. I could measure that and tell for sure. But, yeah, just... didn't know it was going to be quite so complicated. Well, I'll ponder it. I'll figure something out. And maybe the simplest thing to do is to make the board longer, extend it back to about here, and if there is a bit of a gap, I can just put a shim in there. The gap only seems to be like 1/8 of an inch or so. I'm getting prepared to cut out this board. I've checked one corner of the sheet of plywood and it's plenty square enough, so that'll save me some cutting. I only have to cut 2 sides, so butt this up to the corner. I'll just have to cut a chamfer off here, one there, and I think the first cut I will make, let's see, I'm going to cut it this way first. And I'm actually going to cut it all the way to the end, because remember, I don't know how long I want to make this putt. Pretty sure I'm going to be longer than the template, probably somewhere around here. So, cut down the side, chamfer these 2, and then bring it back over to the cabinet and do a dry fit and try to determine exactly where I should cut this to try my scheme where this is going to go up and under and then screw down from the other side. Alright, there we go. Perfect fit. It's just tight enough. It's being held in by friction right now. Force pops out. And it's skinny enough that you can get your hand on either side, because otherwise this would be impossible to install, because you've got to go under this and over the other side. So now comes a trickier bit, which is to make all those holes so that everything lines up perfectly. Won't need to worry about these holes, because those are the very last things I'll do. However else the rest of it lines up, I'll just draw some pilot holes and then put 4 wood screws in on that. And it's the other side, it's a bit trickier, so both I've got to get the holes. And I suppose I could do the same thing from this. Yeah, there are some existing holes in a piece of wood below, but if I screwed new ones in from the top and I'm off a little bit, not the end of the world. But more importantly, I need to get the holes drilled out so that it perfectly lines up with the chassis mounts. Alright, next up I will transfer the center points from the template onto the board, but I'm not going to just blindly truss this. After I mark these points, I'll bring my chassis over here and make sure they line up. These are the 3 wood screws that go into the cabinet. Again, I don't care if those are off a little bit. These are the critical ones. Opening for the antenna terminals, opening for the power cord and speaker cord, and those are much larger than they even need to be, so as long as those are in the ballpark, that's fine. These are the 2 critical points. Well, it turns out that, yeah, these are exactly the same distance apart as my chassis, and to make matters even easier, they are exactly 7 inches on center. So, alright, that's all great. Now, one thing I did notice, though, that's a little confusing, and it says this side visible from bottom, which to me would mean that when this thing is mounted in the cabinet, this would be the bottom side of the board, and it would mount against the chassis like this. No, that can't be, because this square opening is for the antenna and the round is for these 2 wires, so it would go like this. So this is the side that goes up against the chassis. And it seems to me that this hole maybe isn't quite large. They're just barely large enough to encompass both of these, so I may just drill 2 separate holes, one for each of these. Oversize them a bit. And similarly, I don't think you need to have a square quite this tall. All you need is to have something that's enough to get at those terminals. Alright, so I think that's going to be enough for today. I want to finish off the chassis and clear off my whole workbench, and then get my drill press set up and work on drilling out these holes. I may have to run out too. I figure I'll need to use something like a Fostner's bit for the larger diameter, which only goes in part way. Fostner bits are great for making very flat cuts. You know, we only go partially into the wood. I've got a couple. I don't know if I have this diameter though, and I might want to get one for the outer. Well, on his photo, there are no holes that go all the way through, but it seems to be the center ones could probably go all the way through and it wouldn't cause any harm. Probably about 3/8 on that. Well, we'll see. We'll just take it slow and be careful. In the end, I broke down and bought 2 new Forstner bits. I got a 1-inch and a 1/2 inch. That should match the rubber cushion perfectly. I'm going to dig out my drill press now and do some tests on some scraps of wood and see if that is indeed the case. Alright, now let's give this a try on the same type of 3/4 inch plywood, and this time I have set the depth stop just to an arbitrary amount, but it should end up being about like so. think is about right. You don't, the material isn't all that thick, and the center part is fairly long. So I'm going to double check the measurements he sent me and see how deep that's supposed to be. I double checked the diagram he'd sent me, and it says a depth of 7 millimeters, which is 1/4 of an inch. And I was wrong about this center hole. It does go all the way through the board. So I really didn't need a Forstner bit for that. But I didn't have a 1/2-inch drill bit no matter what, so I was going to have to buy one regardless, and it wasn't all that much. So, plus they're nice bits to have. Anyway, so I readjusted my stop here, and they do give you a millimeter and an inch guide on here, so it should be about 7 millimeters now. Yeah, I'd say it's about 1/4 of an inch, give or take. And then just drill out the center. Now, when I do this for real, I'll get the depth right like I have right now, and when I do the board, I'll clamp it in place. So when I swap out the bits, the board won't move. But even if it does a little bit, it's not too hard to center it, because when you're done drilling with these types of bits, it leaves a cone in the middle, so you just line that up with the other bits. Plus, of course, that shock mount that's going in here is rubbery, so you can be off a little bit. It's not going to matter. And the reason it's so discolored there is because I'm just hitting a different layer of plywood. So that actually looks like a little bit of a knot or something in there that I've hit. Okay, here's the smaller bit now. I think I got it more or less centered, and see if I can get all the way through the board. It actually stopped because I hit my stop I had set up earlier. I didn't back it off far enough, I guess. I think it's just about through. There we go. And now let's see how the mount fits into that. Perfection. Doesn't quite go through from the other side. Nice and snug. And that is where the chassis would go into. So if I can make one and another one exactly 7 inches apart, exactly the same relation to the side and back of the board, I will be in business. I'm doing a little test fitting of the chassis right now in the cabinet, and things are lining up quite well. It originally came with 2 of these red-headed bolts when I got it, and I lost one of them somewhere along the way, but that's okay because I don't even know if they're original, plus the end of this one is kind of chewed up. So I searched around, and it turns out that the chassis mounting bolts used in Admiral TVs are perfect. I got plenty of those. So I selected 2 of the best, and in particular they were the type where they had a smooth shaft for a while before the thread started. So that goes through washer, the front of the concentric tuning plate, and then there's a rubber washer on the other side. I got one that's 1/4 of an inch or so thick. I may need to go a little bit thicker, we'll see, because the shafts stick out through the top, and if you don't use any rubber washers at all and put this plate flush with the cabinet, those shafts are sticking out quite high. So in other words, the thicker you put washers here, it moves the chassis up into the cabinet and the shafts don't protrude it quite as far. So we'll see. Another thing I had to do was figure out what thickness shims to put back here. If you take these out, the whole thing rocks back against this and then it's at an angle. So that seems to be about right there. Now those won't go in there in the final assembly. I just want to get this positioned approximately where it's going to finally be so I can take my piece of wood and test fit it in here. And what I'm thinking of doing is take these off, and if I coat these with something like some black paint or ink and then fit my board in, it should leave some registration marks where it touches the board, and then I know that that's right about where I should be drilling my holes in that board. And then you put these on and then you put the board in, and that is what basically supports the bulk of the weight of the chassis. A little bit supported up here, but most of it on these. That's why the placement of them is so critical. If they're off a little bit, chassis won't be, well, either the board won't even fit in here, or it's going to misalign the chassis and the controls won't be centered in the openings on either side of the cabinet. I put a little dot of this red acrylic paint on those posts, got a dead center with a toothpick, and pushed the board onto it, and it spread out more than I expected, but I think I can safely assume the dead center on those is dead center of the posts, because it's spread out so uniformly from the center that those are basically exactly the same as the ends of those posts there, so I don't think the paint really oozed around a lot. But I will also double check that these are exactly 7 inches apart on center and equidistant from the edge of the board. And if so, or if they're close enough, then that is where I'm going to drill. Okay, it turned out those red dots were dead on, so I proceeded to drill the holes out for the 2 rubber mounts. I then drilled out a couple holes for the power cord and speaker, and drilled some holes for wood screws. I just put the 2 outer ones in, and I'm holding this in place because it's just to see if everything lines up. And I know it looks like it's off, but that's because I only have one hand in here. If I let go of this, the whole chassis just flops down. So remember, all the weight rests on these 2. So to find out if this is all really lined up and everything is working properly, I've got to flip this thing back over while keeping these posts lined up in the holes. I think I can do it if I put the camera down and use both hands. I can get this thing lined up and then flip it over. Alright, good news. It looks like my hard work has paid off. The shafts are centered in there, I think, as good as they're ever going to be. This is the band switch. This one is firmly affixed to the chassis, no wiggle room, and that one's dead center. Tone control's pretty darn good too. The volume's off a little bit, but that's the one I replaced, and that's got a little bit of play to it. But as long as they're all going with plenty of clearance around the holes, that's fine. And this is pretty much centered in the opening too, so. Alright, now the only really minor thing is that it's not perfectly level. It's down a little bit on this side. Now, if you recall, the original template I got from that guy said that I should be planing out that support board on both sides. I think he said 2 or 3 millimeters, so say 1/8 of an inch or a little bit less, which is probably just about what that's down by. So if I took that plywood out and plane down the edge of it where it screws to the cabinet, it would raise this side up a bit. Or, since these shafts seem to be a pretty decent height as they are, what I could do, be a little easier since I don't have any power tools that could just plane a piece of wood down like that, those rubber supports that I put in on the other side, I could put thicker ones in, which would, instead of raising this side, in other words, I could drop this side down a little. But regardless, it's pretty good. So you can see it's all nice and cushioned here and floating on those rubber mounts. Pop in the knobs now for a preview. Put a dab of grease in each one so they're not hard to get out. And when I'm finally all said and done, I'll put a bit of felt so the knobs don't scrape against the cabinet. And this guy goes like so. Alright. Band switch, power tone, and the volume. Alright, so I'm gonna take a break now. It took me longer than I thought I would, but good day's work, I think. So what's left? Well, I'll take it all back apart again, and I think I'll go with trying to just lower this side down. These shafts seem to be high enough up. And oh, I still got to cut out a hole in the board for the antenna jacks. And I got to get the chassis working. I guess I have a little bit of work left to do on it. I want to replace that speaker cord and do an alignment. So pick up with all that good stuff in the next installment.